Articles are probably the #1 headache for people just starting out with the German language, and I guess for a lot of other people too. And maybe you too have got all of these articles going round in your head and you can't make sense of them. Well, today I want to show you that articles do actually make sense. Well, almost. Grüß Gott, hallo, ich bin Billy Badger und das ist Bausteine 2. Herzlich willkommen. If you know anything about articles at all, you know that we've got der, die, das, and that they very kindly tell us what the gender of the noun is, don't they? So if I show you these words, then as long as we can see their articles, then we can tell which one is masculine, which one is feminine, and which one is neuter, right? Well, no, not really. It's not always this easy because articles are a little unreliable. I could, for example, show you these words along with our articles and it would be a bit misleading because, yes, while this one's masculine and this one is neuter, this one is actually plural and this one is feminine. So what on earth is going on here? Well, as I said, articles are unreliable, and it's because they're all stressed out, working overtime, trying to do two things at once. They're trying to give us some information about the gender of nouns, but they're also trying to give us some information about what role the noun plays in a sentence. And they'll help you out, but they're not making any promises. And as I'll show you in a minute, it's not actually the subject articles, der, die, das, that are the most reliable when it comes to trying to work out what the gender of nouns is. But before we go any further, let's remember that there are two groups of articles. These ones. We've got definite articles and all of those other little words that behave like them. And then we've got the indefinite articles and all the ones that behave like them. Oh, and we'll be talking a bit about cases here. So if you're not sure what we mean by the word cases, then check out our video from a couple of weeks ago. It's linked up here. Okay, so let's start with the subject case. This is the case that we're probably most familiar with. And let's see what we can learn. Assuming we know that our nouns are the subjects in a sentence, then the definite articles, and the ones like them, are actually pretty reliable. They will show us pretty clearly what the gender of the nouns is. The only potential area for confusion is with plurals because they use the same article as the feminine nouns. But if we're looking at the nouns in context, so in other words, in a sentence, then we can see by the verb endings whether we're dealing with something feminine or something that's in the plural. But while the definite articles are pretty reliable, sadly the indefinite articles and those other words that behave like them are not. They simply split the nouns up into one of two categories. If we look at these words, then all the indefinite articles tell us is which nouns are feminine and which ones aren't. That's all we can expect of them, and that's all they do. So in the subject case, the definite articles are pretty reliable on the whole. Look at these nouns, and I think we can tell pretty easily which ones are masculine, feminine, or neuter. But if we use the indefinite articles instead, then we can't expect the same level of predictable detail. Check out these nouns. Here we only know that this lot are feminine and this lot aren't. And as long as we know what to expect of the different sorts of articles, then that's okay. But let's turn to the accusative case where our nouns are maybe the direct objects of a sentence. Well, here things become a lot clearer. It becomes a lot easier to see what the gender of the nouns are. If we're using the definite articles, then they won't be exactly the same ones we use for the subjects. No. Why does only the masculine article change and why do the others stay the same? Well, who knows? But we're not here to look for reasons. We're here to see how reliably the articles give us the information we need to work out the genders of the nouns. And they still do that really nicely. If you look at these nouns, I think we can agree that the articles help us to distinguish really easily between the genders. We still have the same problem telling the difference between the feminine and the plurals, but otherwise it's pretty clear what they're telling us. This one's masculine, this one is feminine, and this one is neuter. And there's even better news. In the subject case, you remember that the indefinite articles were pretty unreliable. They only told us whether a noun was feminine or not. But now, in the accusative, and actually from now on, the indefinite articles follow the pattern of the definite articles. They are just as reliable. Check out these nouns with their indefinite articles. You can see that all of the genders now have their own article endings. And if you compare them to the definite articles, you can see that it makes sense more or less. The masculine has the same en endings on both the definite and the indefinite articles, and the feminine uses the nice same e endings that we're used to on both articles. And the only one that's different is the neuter. It doesn't get an ending on its indefinite article, which is probably quite good since it's one less ending for us to learn. So in the accusative case, it's pretty easy to work out the gender of the nouns, no matter whether we're using the definite or the indefinite articles. So look at these sentences and see if you can recognize the genders of these nouns. I'll give you a minute to have a think about it. Okay, so let's move on to the dative. Well, with the dative, we're going back to the idea that it's only necessary to show the difference between those nouns that are feminine and those nouns that aren't. And to make it clear that our nouns are now in an important case, the dative, all of our articles change because they have two jobs: to give us information about gender and to give us information about the case. And if we look at these nouns along with our articles, you can see that it's really quite easy to see which of them are feminine and which aren't. There's no way to get any more information from the dative. That's all it does. Because, let's face it, the dative has enough to do without having to bother trying to differentiate between the masculine and the neuter. But again, there's some good news. It doesn't matter whether we're using the definite or the indefinite articles. The endings are the same. Compare these and you'll see that both sorts of articles give us the same information in the same way. They use the same endings. It doesn't matter whether we're using the definite or the indefinite articles. And there's another bit of good news. Whereas it's been difficult up until now to distinguish between the feminine and the plural, because remember, they both had that same E ending, the dative finally decides to make it clear when we're dealing with a feminine noun and when the noun is plural. And it does this by introducing a new article. Well, kind of new, since it's one we've used before. This one shows us clearly which nouns are plural and which are feminine. And if you're observant, you'll see that the nouns even have the same ending, that N, which makes it even clearer that they're plural. Well, this brings us now finally to the genitive. And all we can expect of the genitive articles is that they will again divide our nouns into two groups. They will help us to distinguish between these sorts of nouns with the masculine, the neuter in one group, with that typical es ending on the article and on the noun itself, and the feminine and the plural are in the other group with that er ending. Now, you might be thinking to yourself that this is not very helpful, and it's not trying to be. It's not the job of the genitive articles to clearly tell us what the gender is of the nouns we're using. The nominative and the accusative do this better. So there really only are a few opportunities in a sentence to glimpse those clues that tell us the genders of nouns. German only has 6 articles, 6 definite articles, these ones that it uses and reuses to convey information so that we have a bit of an idea about the gender of a noun and what role it plays in a sentence. So that's where adjectives will sometimes come in and fill in some of the gaps where the articles can't provide enough information. If you look at these nouns with their indefinite articles, pretty hard for us to tell what their gender is. But if I add in some adjectives, you should be able to see straight away that this one is masculine and this one is neuter. So start looking more closely at the little words in sentences, articles, possessive adjectives, and other adjectives, because they give us lots of clues if we know where to look and if we know how sentences work. If you want to find out more about cases, I recommend you watch this video next. Also das war's dann für diese Woche und auch für dieses Video. Danke fürs Zuschauen, alles Gute, auf Wiedersehen und tschüss. Kannst du es da lassen?